Hello there, in this film I want to talk to you about salt. There's a lot more to salt than meets the eye, and I'm very grateful for my studies as a health counsellor quite a long time ago to get a real deep appreciation of salt. So there's a number of different qualities of salt which you can obtain if you want to go out and buy salt, to put salt in your food. But let's take a step back from that a moment. And why put salt in the food? Well, there's a very good reason for that, and that's because evolutionary speaking, we have a connection with the ocean, and this apparently is a wellspring of life on this planet, as the ocean. So that being the case, we need naturally to keep our levels of salinity up, because that's what we get. The ocean is salt water. So the simplest form of salt you can buy is commercial table salt, and this is the one I don't recommend you go for, because this is adulterated usually with magnesium carbonate to make it flow better, so it never becomes stiff and dry, and this is going to mess with your magnesium levels. So it's the worst quality salt you can get hold of, and sad to say, but if you buy any processed foods whatsoever, you can pretty much guarantee that's the only quality of salt that will ever go into it. So the thing about processed salt is it's not particularly good for you. It can upset your magnesium balance, and there are so much better alternatives on the market. So there was a big breakthrough when sea salt started to become regularly available in the mainstream shops. There was a time you only found it in health and whole food shops, but every supermarket now will sell you a sea salt, and this is a great step forward because it's literally seawater which has been allowed to dry in very, very shallow pools until the salt crystallizes out. Rather than just being sodium chloride with some magnesium sulfate bunged in to make it more saleable, you've got a completely rich mixture of all the minerals that are in the sea. So there's trace elements, gold, silver, all sorts in there when you're getting sea salt. So this is a much better balance, bearing in mind it appears that we come from the sea. If this is the case, then naturally the salt we want to take in would be the similar quality. However, there's a disadvantage to using sea salt today, which is a lot of sea salt comes from the Atlantic, and as we know, there is more and more pollution taking place in all of our seas because of our irresponsible behaviour as a human race, dumping sewage and goodness knows what else, chemical wastes, mercury into the sea. Ultimately not good news for any of the sea life, and not good news for us if we're buying and using sea salt. So the one that I recommend, and the one that's golden ticket on for me, is Himalayan salt. So what is so special about this salt is it's been harvested from an underground sea, which is many, many tens of thousands of years old, literally from the Himalayas. Now, if we think about our geography, we're all well aware that the Himalayas are mountains, there's no seas around, and this teaches us something quite valuable about our Earth, which is we have in the past had what we call axis shifts, and this means that the position of the North and South poles, because of the wobble, what happens is the planet wobbles. As the wobble increases, it increases to the point where these North and South poles shift, and then suddenly it's spinning from a different perspective. When this happens, this is a really major cataclysmic event, and there are historical and archaeological records to show that this has happened before now, really major times for the Earth. From our point of view, the advantage of the Himalayan salt is you're making use of salt which has been preserved in a state where no pollution has been allowed access to it for many tens of thousands of years. And the other thing about it, it is utterly beautiful. You get all shades of pink and orange crystals when you get Himalayan salt. It's very useful for certain practical situations. If a person's suffering from a hangover, just one large crystal in a pint of water will hydrate you, but it will also rebalance your minerals, which is something quite important if you've been drinking too much alcohol the night before. So that makes it really good stuff too. In terms of cooking, I find it excellent. I find you need to use less of it than the other salts. And this is really bringing me to perhaps what I think is the most important subject. I've decided to save it until last, which is, what is salt really all about? Now, in my counsellor's course, my health counsellor's course, I learnt from Taoist philosophy of two opposing qualities which have the names yin and yang. Now, it depends on which system you follow, but if you follow the system which I was taught, which is based upon the Japanese model, then this is the way that it is observed. Yang relates to closing down, to contraction, to becoming smaller, tighter and more tense. And the opposing state, yin, is all to do with becoming more receptive, more open, more easy, more relaxed, more going with the flow. And these two opposing states are literally what we are all dancing between in our daily lives. And on my course, what I was taught was this incredibly valuable bit of information, which is why I want to commend to you. When you learn the right amount of salt for your body, you will find that the quality of your life will go and improve beyond your wildest imaginings. Because what happens for most people is most people have no awareness of salt and the need to have the correct intake. And traditionally, certainly in the Western European society and in North American society, what we had is a tradition of people eating very large amounts of meat. If you eat a lot of meat, the animal food that you're eating contains a lot of salt anyway. And yet people who have been habituated to doing that used to sprinkle loads and loads of chemicalized refined salt onto their foods. And what tended to happen is they tended to become more tense, more tight. And as a society, you can see what happened, particularly going through the 20th century, all the wars and leading up to 1950s and 1960s, people became more and more aggressive territorial empire building. This actually relates to their salt consumption, amazingly enough. So let me take you even further back on our journey, because this is what is so miraculous about salt. I'm talking purely practically and pragmatically from the point of view of being a person. Salt is the most concentrated form of matter that you deal with in your daily existence. I'm leaving out things like uranium and plutonium because, of course, they are much more dense than salt, and so is lead, but they're not part of the daily life, not part of our human intake. In terms of what you take into your body, it is the most concentrated substance that you ever put into your body. Thus, the need to be very careful about the quantity. So the general advice I give to people, particularly if they are used to eating meat, is to reduce the salt intake. And bearing in mind that all processed foods have had salt dumped into it, so if you go on to a natural diet where you're cooking your own food, making your own salads out of fruits and vegetables, this gives you the ability to have the first real control over your salt intake in your life. Because suddenly, all the food you're eating, you've prepared yourself, and you can control the amount of salt. And you will find that if you reduce the amount of salt, and this is beneficial, you'll find you'll become more relaxed, but not too relaxed, and you've got enough of what I would call the inimical tension to get things done. So this is what you're playing with. You're playing with this fascinating dynamic between if you eat too little salt, and I've come across certain vegans, for example, who've gone totally salt-free, and they end up into a state of complete chaos. They're not able to organize anything in their lives because they've been for some years without any salt input, and literally their bodies can't function properly, and it affects their ability to make decisions on a day-to-day basis. So an excess of salt can lead to, in extreme forms, aggressive and violent behavior and even homicidal behavior. A real lack of salt, a complete absence of salt, eventually can lead to states of disintegration, chaos, and even suicide. Those are the two extreme states, homicide and suicide. So far too much salt leads to homicide, far too little salt leads to suicide. So I want to give you my personal experience of this. I was working in the restaurant that was part of the centre where I was doing my health counselling studies, and it was quite an eye-opening experience for me because I was eating more salt than I normally do. And here's another very important clue for you. All restaurants overdose their food with salt because it means the customers buy more drinks. So if you're eating out on a regular basis, you're almost certainly oversalted, which is another really good reason to control your salt intake by making your own food. So in that situation, there I was. I'd been working in the restaurant solidly for a month and eating the restaurant food because it was part of the perks of the job, and being consciously aware I was oversalting myself. I wanted to know what would happen. And I'll tell you what happened. I got to the point that I was due to attend a seminar, and I rushed into the building because I was almost late. I rushed up to the classroom, and I had been eating so much salt, I had become so tight, so tense, so wound up, that when I reached the doorway itself, I stopped dead and I froze and I couldn't move. And I didn't understand what was happening to myself. At this point I realised my rational mind was really not going to be able to cope with this situation. I knew I couldn't move into the room and I couldn't move out of the room. I was literally stuck. And this is a wonderful example of what happens when you excessively salt yourself. You can literally become stuck. Another important indicator for people interested in the spiritual path is if you eat too much salt, then you are going to be deaf and blind to the other worlds. You're not going to have any capacity to do out-of-body work. Working with the plant spirits is going to produce no results, all because of over-salting. And people who do the plant spirit medicine retreat, they go on the plant diet, and what's the very first thing they know? No salt for a limited period of time, just for 7 days, just to desalt them enough so they can be sensitive to these subtle realms. So there I was completely immersed in the third dimension, no connection to higher self, to guides, to inspiration, stuck. And I literally stood in that doorway for some minutes, unable to move, until suddenly I got inspiration, and it was a completely blind body taking over situation. I literally grabbed my bag and I ran out of the building, jumped onto my bicycle, and I cycled into Piccadilly Circus, because I was in London at the time, and I marched into this pancake house and I ordered a huge pancake with loads of maple syrup and cream and ice cream and gorged myself, and my body just went, balance has been restored. So I'm bringing up such a trivial little subject in a way, because I'm only talking about salt, what's the big deal? And yet actually it turns out to be a massive subject, because if you learn how to eat the right amount of salt for you, so here's the thing, you can't go on the internet and find out the right amount of salt for you. The information you will receive will be useless, because every person is individual, so you've all got individual salt needs. If you've got a background of eating a lot of meat, then what you're going to need to do is to have a real low salt diet for some time until you get sorted out, and you might want to increase a bit afterwards. If you've been raw food for a long time or vegan, you might need to up your salt levels. And these are the golden clues. If you've got too much salt in your body, you get too tight and too tense and irritable and aggressive and shut down. And if you're not eating enough salt, you end up very chaotic, not able to organize yourself, very easily led, very go with the flow, don't really get anything together, not your word, letting people down left, right and centre. So those are the two extremes. So the first thing is, every individual requires their own level of salt, and then the other really important thing, your salt requirements are changing constantly as you go through your life. It changes with the season. We generally want less in the summer and more in the winter, especially if we live in a cold country. So what I learned in my health counsellor's course is they threw this whole thing out to us pretty much as I'm doing now. And the conclusion was, there is no simple answer. What we ask you and we invite you to do is to become aware of salt in your life, play with it and explore, and adjust and adapt according to what's appropriate for you. So by having a good salt intake that's appropriate for you and a good water intake, you will automatically cure the vast majority of ailments which plague people in the Western society. So didn't I start off by saying that the whole point would be looking at ways to increase your health for little or no money? And here's the thing about the Himalayan salt, it costs you £3 or £4 for a packet, and that's going to last you for months and months and months if you're anything like my salt intake requirement. So a few pounds for months and months and months of really good health, it's got to be good. So I invite you to be playful and exploratory with your salt intake, and just notice how you feel and enjoy your life. Thank you.